Welcome to the War Insider YouTube channel.
After the failed blackout, Putin came up with a new war plan against Ukraine. Putin expects to save his life at the cost of the death of millions of Russians. Putin is not at all saddened by the growing losses at the front. Fear of defeat and perverted logic prompt the Russian dictator to follow the path of escalation. He doesn't care how many hundreds of corpses it takes. Hence the idea of the second stage of mobilization larger than the previous one. The plan is to enlist up to 2 million Russians. Such intentions of the Kremlin dictator have been talked about since the spring of last year, but it seems the Kremlin is already moving from intentions to actions. On January 3rd, in a traditional evening address to Ukrainians, Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about strengthening Ukraine's defense on the eve of those new mobilization processes being prepared by the terrorist state. Russia mobilizes those it wants to leave to die. We mobilize the civilized world. For the sake of life, the president emphasized. According to information on social networks, on this day, Putin held a meeting with the leadership of the power and military blocs of the Russian Federation. The Russian dictator listened to a report on the readiness to carry out a full range of mobilization measures. Putin confirmed his intention to call up about 2 million people in 2023. The issue of border closure was also discussed. Director of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov, declared his full readiness for this, recalling that Russia currently has a ban on leaving its territory for almost 8 million citizens, half of whom are men of military age. Putin's blitzkrieg plan in Ukraine has failed. The Kremlin troops, contrary to dire forecasts, did not manage to break through to Kiev in 48 hours, 72 hours, or even in a month. The Russians failed to capture Mykolaiv and Odessa, establish full control over Donbass and southern Ukraine, and secure a corridor to Crimea. At the end of autumn, the Kremlin dreamer enthusiastically began to implement the next idea to lay down the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, creating a real humanitarian disaster in Ukraine. Merciless and barbaric massive missile strikes on the civilian infrastructure of Ukraine were supposed to plunge it into cold and darkness. Indeed, this is a very difficult test for Ukrainians. But it turned out that it was not fatal. The country quickly bought generators, built a network of points of invincibility, and showed the world the wonders of organizing work in conditions of regular power outages in the banking system, hospitals, gas stations, shops, and other life-critical areas. Despite the change in plans, the goal of the Kremlin dictator remains stable: to destroy Ukraine as a subject, as an independent state, by occupying its entire territory and changing the power in Kiev. For a long time, Putin did not dare to announce the first wave of mobilization, which was called partial. He was afraid that if the war came to the house of Russians in the form of coffins, their indifference to the war would be replaced by discontent. However, in the end, I was pleasantly surprised. According to the survey results of the sociological group Levada, the attitude of ordinary Russians towards the government did not fundamentally change after that. Despite the social stress caused by sanctions, mobilization, and the war in Ukraine in general, the number of residents of the Russian Federation who want change has decreased from 59% to 47%. Only 11% of Russians are in favor of changes in government policy in one form or another, and of these 11% dissatisfied, only 10% want the war in Ukraine to end and the Russian Federation to start negotiations with Ukraine. But business elites, officials, and the political elite of the Russian Federation have slightly different attitudes. Those who, due to sanctions and gigantic state spending on war, lose their money in foreign banks, yachts in the Mediterranean Sea, mansions in London and Miami. Among Russian elites, there are growing questions about Putin's tactics in waging war against Ukraine and a series of humiliating military retreats this fall, writes The Washington Post. Representatives of business circles interviewed by The Washington Post cannot predict what may happen next year. They express doubt that Putin himself knows how he can act. There is a huge disappointment among the people around him. He clearly does not know what to do, said one Russian billionaire who maintains contacts with high-ranking officials. Russian elites are not yet openly opposed to the Kremlin's policies and do not oppose Putin, but they constantly wonder, when will it all end? How can he tell us that everything is going according to plan, when we are already in the 10th month of the war, and we were told that it will take only a few days, another interlocutor of the Washington Post, who is an official, indignant. And Putin has no choice but to present a new plan. He tries to give the impression that he knows where he is going. This time it is a large-scale mobilization. What could this mean for Ukraine? It seems that Russia already has a plan for the deployment of the war for 2 or 3 years, which provides for several waves of mobilization. Accordingly, several powerful shafts of cannon fodder are being prepared, with which they will bombard us, says military analyst, former platoon commander of the Adar Battalion Yevgeny Daiky. According to it, the Kremlin hopes that if the word rags on, the Russian Federation will allegedly be able to punch holes in the sanctions regime and improve the work of its defense industry. Now the Russian military-industrial complex is standing still and completely inoperable without imported pots. That is, the loudly announced import substitution did not take place. Currently, the Russian army also has an acute shortage of artillery ammunition. So, the Russians hope to overcome this problem through loopholes in the sanctions. The Russian Federation hopes to arrange the supply of the necessary spare pots in order to resume the full production of ammunition. This is a very undesirable option for Ukraine, because in this case, Russia wants to drag us into a war of resource depletion, and they have more physical resources. It's obvious, says Yevhen Daiky. But it should be understood that, possessing an unlimited human resource, Russia has serious limitations in terms of its proper use. After all, the Russian Federation is still not able to properly train and equip the military, called up during the autumn partial mobilization. In order for 120,130,000 people who have received summonses to get to the front, it takes 2 to 3 months, which are spent on training the mobilized people, their transportation, resettlement, and so on. Therefore, it will take even more time for the mass of 2 million, explains Serhiy Kuzin, head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation. So even if Russia can call up 2 million people, the question remains whether it has enough resources to provide them with everything they need. Since information has already appeared about the purchase of helmets and bulletproof vests in Iran. However, military analyst Pro Chernik assures that there is an incredibly large amount of old Soviet junk in the warehouses of the Russian army. We don't need to think about who and how will put them on and equip them. Back in the Soviet Union, millions of pairs of Kurza boots were produced, and millions of sets of cotton uniforms were also stored in warehouses. 100 million units of Kalashnikov assault rifles were produced, 37 million Mosin rifles, 1.5 million 18 Serbian dinars class hand anti-tank grenades, more than 9 million RPG-7s, several million Makarov pistols, and more than 1 million machine guns. And no one there thinks about normal clothes, food, or weapons. They gave the soldier a Kalashnikov assault rifle with 2 cartridges or a Mosin rifle. They gave me 2 grenades and an MPL-50 sapper blade in my hands and in battle. Notes expert Chernik. He agrees that if Putin needs to kill 100, 200, 500,000, or even 1 million Russians to preserve his regime, he will kill them without thinking. But we should not worry about it. We should be concerned about one thing: how to grind this huge human mass, this gigantic minced meat. For this we need weapons, weapons and more weapons. Their resource is colossal, but not limitless. Let's grind it, the expert has no doubts. The only adequate response of the Ukrainian army to this challenge is to provide it with a sufficient number of weapons. Everyone agrees with this. According to Yevhen Daiky, this war could have ended with the victory of Ukraine as early as last year. But for this, Ukraine had to be provided with an order of magnitude more shock weapons in the summer. Unfortunately, we were not given this on purpose, and we could not destroy the entire contingent of the Russian army at that time faster than we had time to replenish it with mobs, the expert notes. On the other hand, he says, we ourselves are to blame for this, because if we had spent the last 8 years fully preparing for this war, we would not have found ourselves in such a situation. In this struggle for resources, of course, Western weapons are newer, more accurate. What is given to us, we very quickly master and use. Accordingly, if we receive the necessary amount of weapons and military equipment in time, then the advantage will be on our side. The commander of the United Forces of Ukraine, Lieutenant General Serhiy Nave, is confident. Will Putin succeed in implementing his next plan? Follow the events with us.